Or, said I, if for no other reason, for this, that you put alum into your bread. But no matter, alum or no alum, for I was resolved to forestall any argument on that point. Know that I am a virtuoso in the art of murder, am desirous of improving myself in its details, and am enamored of your vast surface of throat, to which I am determined to be a customer. Is it so? Said he. But I'll find you custom in another line. And so saying, he threw himself into a boxer attitude. The very idea of his boxing struck me as ludicrous. It is true, a London baker had distinguished himself in the ring, and became known to fame under the title of Master of the Rolls. But he was young and unspoiled, whereas this man was a monstrous feather-bed in person, 50 years old, and totally out of condition. Spite of all this, however, and contending against me, who am a master in the art, he made so desperate a defense that many times I feared he might turn the tables upon me, and that I, an amateur, might be murdered by a rascally baker. What a situation! Minds of sensibility will sympathize with my anxiety. How severe it was you may understand by this, that for the first 13 rounds the baker had the advantage. Round the 14th, I received a blow on the right eye which closed it up. In the end I believe this was my salvation, for the anger it roused in me was so great, in this and every one of the 3 following rounds I floored the baker. Round 18th, the baker came up piping and manifestly the worse for wear. His geometric exploits in the 4 last rounds had done him no good. However, he showed some skill in stopping a message which I was sending to his cadaverous mug, in delivering which my foot slipped and I went down. Round 19th, surveying the baker, I became ashamed of having been so much bothered by his shapeless mass of dough, and I went in fiercely and admitted some severe punishment. A rally took place, both went down, baker undermost, 10-3 on amateur. Round 20th, the baker jumped up with surprising agility. Indeed, he managed his pins capitally and fought wonderfully, considering that he was drenched in perspiration. But the shine was now taken out of him, and his game was the mere effect of panic. It was now clear that he could last not much longer. In the course of this round we tried the weaving system, in which I had greatly the advantage, and hit him repeatedly on the conch. My reason for this was, that his conch was covered with carbuncles, and I thought I should vex him by taking such liberties with his conch, which in fact I did. The next 3 rounds the master of the rolls staggered about like a cow on the ice. Seeing how matters stood, in round 24th I whispered something into his ear, which sent him down like a shot. It was nothing more than my private opinion of the value of his throat at an annuity office. This little confidential whisper affected him greatly. The very perspiration was frozen on his face, and for the next 2 rounds I had it all my own way. And when I called time for the 27th round, he lay like a log on the floor. After which, said I to the amateur, it may be presumed that you accomplished your purpose. You are right, said he mildly. I did, and a great satisfaction, you know, it was to my mind, for by this means I killed 2 birds with 1 stone, meaning that he had both thumped the baker and murdered him. Now, for the life of me, I could not see that, for on the contrary, to my mind it appeared that he had taken 2 stones to kill 1 bird, having been obliged to take the conceit out of him first with his fist, and then with his tools. But no matter for his logic. The moral of his story was good, for it showed what an astonishing stimulus to latent talent is contained in any reasonable prospect of being murdered. A pursy, unwieldy, half-cataleptic baker of Mannheim had absolutely fought 26 rounds with an accomplished English boxer merely upon this inspiration. So greatly was natural genius exalted and sublimed by the general presence of his murderer. Really, gentlemen, when one hears of such things as these, it becomes a duty, perhaps a little to soften that extreme asperity with which most men speak of murder. To hear people talk, you would suppose that all the disadvantages and inconveniences were on the side of being murdered, and that there were none at all in not being murdered. But considerate men think otherwise. "Certainly," said Jeremy Taylor, "it is a less temporal evil to fall by the rudeness of a sword than by the violence of a fever, and the axe (to which he might have added the ship carpenter's mallet and the crowbar) a much less affliction than a strangury. Very true, the bishop talks like a wise man, and an amateur as he is, and another great philosopher, Marcus Aurelius, was equally above the vulgar prejudices on this subject. He declared it to be one of the, quote, noblest functions of reason to know whether it is time to walk out of the world or not. Book 3, Collar's translation. No sort of knowledge being rarer than this, surely that man must be a most philanthropic character who undertakes to instruct people in this branch of knowledge gratis, and at no little hazard to himself. All this, however, I throw out only in the way of speculation to future moralists, declaring in the meantime my own private conviction that very few men commit murder upon philanthropic or patriotic principles, and repeating what I have already said once at least, that as to the majority of murderers, they are very incorrect characters. With respect to the Williams murders, the sublimest and most entire in their excellence that ever were committed, I shall now allow myself to speak incidentally. Nothing less than an entire lecture, or even an entire course of lectures, would suffice to expound their merits. But one curious fact connected with his case I shall mention, because it seems to imply that the blaze of his genius absolutely dazzled the eye of criminal justice. You all remember, I doubt not, that the instruments with which he executed his first great work, the murder of the Mars, were a ship's carpenter's mallet and a knife. Now the mallet belonged to an old Swede, one John Peterson, and bore his initials. This instrument Williams left behind him in Mars House, and it fell into the hands of the magistrates. Now, gentlemen, it is a fact that the publication of this circumstance of the initials led immediately to the apprehension of Williams, and, if made earlier, would have prevented his second great work, the murder of the Williamsons, which took place precisely 12 days after. But the magistrates kept back this fact from the public for an entire 12 days, and until that second work was accomplished. That finished, they published it, apparently feeling that Williams had now done enough for his fame, and that his glory was at length placed beyond the reach of accident. As to Mr. Thurtell's case, I know not what to say. Naturally, I have every disposition to think highly of my predecessor in the chair of this society, and I acknowledge that his lectures were unexceptionable. But, speaking ingenuously, I do really think that his principal performance as an artist has been much overrated. I admit that at first I was myself carried away by the general enthusiasm. On the morning when the murder was made known in London, there was the fullest meeting of amateurs that I had ever known since the days of Williams. Old bedridden connoisseurs who had got into a peevish way of sneering and complaining, quote, that there was nothing doing, end quote, now hobbled down to our clubroom. Such hilarity, such benign expression of general satisfaction, I have rarely witnessed. On every side you saw people shaking hands, congratulating each other, and forming dinner parties for the evening. And nothing was to be heard beside the triumphant challenges of, "Well, will this do? Is this the right thing? Are you satisfied at last?" But in the midst of this I remember we all grew silent on hearing the old cynical amateur, L.S., that laudator temporis acti, stumping along with his wooden leg. He entered the room with his usual scowl, and as he advanced he continued to growl and stutter the whole way. "Not an original idea in the whole piece, mere plagiarism, base plagiarism from the hints that I threw out. Besides, the style is as hard as Albert Durer, as coarse as Fuseli." Many thought that this was mere jealousy and general waspishness, but I confess that, when the first glow of enthusiasm had subsided, I have found the most judicious critics to agree that there was something falsetto in the style of Thurtell. The fact is, he was a member of our society, which naturally gave a friendly bias to our judgments, and his person was universally familiar to the Cockneys, which gave him, with the whole London public, a temporary popularity that his pretensions are not capable of supporting. For opinionum commendabilitas natura judicia confirmat. There was, however, an unfinished design of Thurtell's for the murder of a man with a pair of dumbbells, which I admired greatly. It was a mere outline that he never completed, but to my mind it seemed every way superior to his chief work. I remember that there was great regret expressed by some amateurs that this sketch should have been left in an unfinished state. But there I cannot agree with them, for the fragments and first bold outlines of original artists have often a felicity about them which is apt to vanish in the management of the details. The case of the Mackeens I consider far beyond the vaunted performance of Thurtell, indeed above all praise, and bearing that relation, in fact, to the immortal works of Williams, which the Aeneid bears to the Iliad. But it is now time that I should say a few words about the principles of murder,